Brilliant work on this turnaround plan. Your vision saved us. I watched the investor clasp Wade's shoulder like they were old friends celebrating something monumental. The handshake lasted too long. The smile was too wide. Wade leaned back in his chair with this relaxed confidence that made my chest tighten. 14 people in that room, every single one of them, looking at him like he'd just pulled the company back from the edge of collapse. And maybe he had if you asked him. If you asked anyone in that moment. But I knew different. 3 months. That's how long I'd spent rebuilding their expansion model from scratch. 3 months of 16-hour days while Wade left every Thursday at 2 for his standing tea time. 3 months of running projections until my brain felt like mush, of finding the holes in their international growth plan that were bleeding money faster than anyone wanted to admit, of mapping out a step-by-step approach to stop the hemorrhaging and actually turn things around. The numbers were mine. Every single calculation. The projections showing which markets to abandon and which to double down on mine. The risk mitigation strategies that would save them from another disaster, all mine. I'd even color-coded the spreadsheets so the board could follow along without getting lost in the data. Wade had contributed exactly 2 things: his name on the presentation file and his ability to show up on time. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Wade said to the investor. His voice had this humble quality to it, like he was trying not to brag but couldn't help feeling proud. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. He didn't say my name, didn't even glance in my direction. The investor moved on to the next board member, still talking about Wade's innovative thinking. Someone else chimed in about his strategic vision. Another person mentioned how impressive it was that he'd managed to identify problems that their entire leadership team had overlooked. Wade just nodded along, taking it all in, soaking up praise for work he couldn't have done if someone held a manual to his head and read it out loud. I sat there in my chair, fingers laced together in my lap, watching this whole thing unfold like I was outside my own body, like I was watching it happen to someone else. But it was happening to me. The meeting wrapped up, people started gathering their things, shaking hands, making small talk about lunch plans and upcoming holidays. Wade stood up, buttoning his jacket, chatting with one of the board members about golf courses in the area. I reached up and unclipped my visitor badge from my shirt. The plastic was warm from being against my body for the last 2 hours. I set it down on the table, right between the 2 water pitchers someone had brought in earlier. Then I stood up. I'm done here. Effective immediately. The room didn't go quiet, that's not what happened. But people stopped mid-sentence. The board member Wade was talking to looked over at me with this confused expression, like I'd just started speaking another language. My boss, Orson, took a step toward me. What are you talking about? I'm resigning. Right now. I'll send you something in writing by end of day, but consider this my official notice. Wade finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it there, in his expression, this flicker of panic that he tried to cover up real quick. Let's talk about this outside, Orson said, already moving toward the door. There's nothing to talk about. I walked out, just turned and left, while they all stood there, trying to figure out what had just happened. I didn't run, didn't storm out, just walked at a normal pace through the building, got in my car, and drove home. My name is Kaya, and that was the day I stopped letting other people take what was mine. Orson started texting within 20 minutes. Then the messages turned into calls. I let the first few go to voicemail, but by the 17th attempt, I picked up just to make it stop. You're overreacting, he said. No, hello, no asking if I was okay. Just straight into telling me I was wrong. He was just accepting praise for the team. That's what team leaders do. Team leaders, I repeated. Wade's a team leader now? You know what I mean. He was representing the work you both did. Both did. Orson, tell me one thing Wade did on that project, besides spell check the title page. Silence on his end, long enough that I almost thought the connection dropped. It's more complicated than that, he finally said. Wade has relationships with those investors. They trust him. That matters in these situations. So I do the work and he gets the applause because people like his personality better? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? More silence. Then, sleep on it. Don't make any rash decisions. We can figure this out tomorrow. I hung up. Here's what nobody tells you about quitting in a moment like that. The rest of your day feels really strange. I went home and sat in my living room for an hour, not watching anything, not reading anything. just sitting there thinking about every other time something like this had happened. Smaller versions of it. Wade taking my ideas in team meetings and rephrasing them like they just occurred to him. Wade's name appearing first on project reports I'd written 90% of. Wade getting invited to leadership dinners while I stayed late, finishing work that had both our names on it. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that the work spoke for itself, that eventually people would notice who was actually producing results. But they hadn't noticed. They just kept praising Wade. That night, I updated my professional profiles. Not with some angry post about what happened, nothing like that. Just quietly updated my experience, my skills, the specific projects I'd worked on. I made sure every turnaround strategy I'd developed was listed under my name, with details about the outcomes. Then I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to 3 messages from people I'd never met. Investment managers, at different groups. They'd seen my profile updates. They'd heard about the turnaround model I'd built, and they wanted to know if I was available to help with their struggling acquisitions. At first, I thought maybe Orson had sent them my way as some kind of peace offering, but when I talked to the first one, he mentioned he'd been trying to track me down for weeks after hearing about my work through industry contacts. "We've got a similar situation," he told me. "Company that expanded too fast, burning money in the wrong markets. I heard you're the person who knows how to fix this kind of thing." "Where did you hear that?" "People talk. Your model's been making the rounds in our circles. Everyone wants to know who built it. Not Wade's name, mine." Before I continue further, thank you for listening to my story. It means everything to have you here. If you're listening while commuting, working, or just taking a moment for yourself, I see you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know where in the world you are. Now back to the story. By the end of that first week, I had 7 different investment groups asking me to consult on their failing portfolios. They didn't want someone to just patch problems. They wanted someone who could look at a broken expansion strategy and rebuild it from the ground up. That was my specialty, the thing I'd gotten good at over years of fixing other people's messes. I started saying yes, 1 project at a time, at first, then 2 at once, then 5. The work was intense, but in a different way than before. Instead of spending months on a single project while someone else got celebrated for it, I was spending weeks on each one, getting paid what I should have been making in a year, and getting thanked by the actual decision makers who knew exactly who'd done the work. Orson kept trying to reach me, less frequently as the days went on, but still, he'd send messages asking if I'd reconsider, saying they really needed me back, that things weren't the same without me. I didn't respond. Wade tried exactly once. A single text message that said, "I hope there's no hard feelings. You're really talented and I'm sure you'll do great things." I blocked his number. 6 weeks after I walked out of that investor meeting, my situation had completely changed. I was working with 11 different investment portfolios, making more money than I'd thought possible, getting recognized by name when I walked into meetings. People listened when I talked. Nobody interrupted me to rephrase what I'd just said. Nobody's name appeared on my work except mine. And then Orson's name showed up on my phone again. Different time of day, this time late evening on a Tuesday. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me curious. "We need help." His voice sounded strained, tired. "The expansion's hemorrhaging money. Worse than before. The board wants you back. Name your price." I let that sit in the air for a moment. Imagined him in his office, probably pacing, probably desperate. "What happened to your brilliant strategist?" I asked. The pause that followed told me everything. He couldn't replicate the results. Replicate. That's an interesting word choice. "Orson, listen, I know how this looks. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like Wade took applause for work he couldn't actually do, and now you're in trouble because you believed him. The investors are pulling out. They're asking specifically for you. They want to know why you're not leading the implementation." Of course they were, because investors aren't stupid. They can tell the difference between someone who understands the strategy and someone who's just presenting it. "Because he didn't create it," I said. "That's why he couldn't replicate the results. You can't replicate something you never understood in the first place." Orson made this sound half sigh, half groan. "Please, we're losing everything. The board is panicking. I'm being told to fix this, or they're cleaning house. Your model was supposed to save us, but without you here to implement it, it's falling apart." My model is fine. Your execution is the problem. Then come back and execute it. Whatever you want. Whatever it takes. I sat down on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, thinking about all those times I'd watched Wade get praised for my work. All those times I'd swallowed my frustration and told myself to just keep my head down and produce good results. That eventually, someone would notice. I'll consult, I said, but I'm not coming back as an employee. I work for myself now. Fine. Whatever. Name your terms. 4 times my old salary, and that's the consulting rate, not annual. You're paying me what I'm worth now, not what you decided I was worth before. I heard him breathe out. Done. Anything else? Yeah. I present directly to the board and investors. No intermediaries, no managers, no one else's name on my work, just mine. Of course, absolutely. And Wade sits in that room while I do it. Silence. Orson, did you hear me? I heard you. I just don't understand why that's necessary. Because I want him to watch while I explain every single thing he claimed as his own. Every decision point he took applause for. Every calculation he couldn't reproduce. I want him to sit there while the same people who praised him realize exactly what happened. That's the condition. Take it or I hang up, and you can figure this out yourself. More silence. Then, I'll make it happen. We set the meeting for 2 weeks out. That gave me time to finish up my current projects and prepare for what was coming. Those 2 weeks felt longer than the previous 6 combined. I kept working with my other clients, kept building my reputation, but part of my brain was already planning what I'd say in that room, how I'd walk them through the strategy in a way that made it crystal clear who'd built it. I wasn't nervous exactly, more like focused, the way you feel before something important that you know you can handle. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, from anticipation. I lay there in the dark, thinking about Wade's face when the investors had praised him. That relaxed confidence, that easy acceptance of recognition he hadn't earned. Tomorrow, that was going to change. I showed up 15 minutes early. The building looked the same as it had 6 weeks ago, but walking into it felt completely different. Last time, I'd been an employee hoping someone would notice my work. This time, I was a hired expert they were paying premium rates to fix their disaster. Orson met me in the lobby. He looked worse than he'd sounded on the phone, shadows under his eyes, shirt not as crisp as usual. Thank you for coming, he said. The board's already gathering. They're very eager to hear from you. Is Wade here? He's here. I told him he needed to attend as part of the transition team. And he agreed? He didn't have much choice. We walked through the building toward the same room where the investor meeting had happened. My footsteps echoed in the hallway. I wasn't wearing the same clothes as last time. I'd chosen something sharper, more expensive. The kind of outfit that said I wasn't asking for permission anymore. The room was full when we entered. 14 people again, but different faces this time. The full board, the investors who'd been pulling out, senior leadership I recognized from my time working there, and Wade, sitting near the back, looking like he wished he could disappear into the wall. Our eyes met for half a second. He looked away first. Everyone, this is Kaya, Orson announced. She'll be walking us through the expansion strategy and its implementation. Several board members nodded. One of the investors, the same one who'd praised Wade, stood up and shook my hand. We've heard a lot about you, he said. People in the industry speak very highly of your work. I appreciate that, I said. Everyone found their seats. I moved to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projector, and pulled up my presentation. 3 months of work, distilled into a format that would take 3 hours to properly explain. I didn't rush, didn't summarize. I walked them through every single part of it. Started with the initial assessment, how I'd identified which markets were draining resources without generating returns. Showed them the analysis I'd run on their expansion timeline. The specific points where decisions had been made without adequate data. Explained exactly how I'd rebuilt their model from the ground up. This section here, I said, pointing to a particularly complex projection, required understanding the local banking regulations in 4 different countries. I spent 2 weeks just researching compliance requirements, because one mistake here would have meant legal exposure worth millions. One of the board members leaned forward. Wade, did you help with this part? I didn't look at Wade, kept my focus on the board member. I worked on this section alone. It required specific knowledge of international finance law. Wade stayed quiet. I moved to the next part. the risk mitigation strategies, the market-by-market breakdown of where to pull back and where to invest more heavily, the timeline for implementation that would minimize disruption while maximizing recovery. The key insight here, I explained, was recognizing that the problem wasn't the expansion itself, it was the pace and targeting. You'd moved into markets that required 3 to 5 years of relationship building before profitability, but you were expecting returns in 18 months. That mismatch was killing you. The same investor who'd praised Wade was taking notes now, really engaged, asking questions about specific data points. How did you identify which markets had the longer timeline? He asked. Historical analysis of similar expansions in the same regions, cross-referenced with local economic reports and competitor performance. It took about 40 hours of research, but once the pattern became clear, the recommendations followed naturally. Another board member spoke up. And the implementation plan? How confident are you that this will work? The model's sound. The issue you've been having is execution. The strategy requires someone who understands not just what to do, but why each step matters and how they connect. You can't follow it like a recipe. You have to understand the underlying principles, which is why it wasn't working, one of the investors said slowly, realization dawning. We thought we could just follow the plan, but without understanding the reasoning behind it. It falls apart the moment you hit an unexpected variable. I finished, which you did, multiple times. I glanced at Wade then, just briefly. He was staring at his hands, jaw tight. The presentation continued. Hour 2, hour 3. I answered every question, clarified every confusion, walked them through scenarios and contingencies, and alternative approaches if certain assumptions proved wrong. By the end, the energy in the room had completely shifted. The investors who'd been ready to pull out were talking about moving forward. The board members were asking about implementation timelines. Everyone was focused, engaged, understanding exactly what needed to happen. This is exceptional work, the lead investor said. I have to ask, when we were here 6 weeks ago, we were told this was Wade's strategy. Can you clarify the collaboration process? The room got very still. I looked at Wade, made sure everyone saw me looking at him. Then I turned back to the investor. There was no collaboration. I built this strategy alone over 3 months. Wade's contribution was attending the presentation, where I explained it to you. You could feel the shift. Not dramatic, no one gasped or anything like that, but people sat back in their seats differently, exchanged glances, reassessed. The investor who'd shaken Wade's hand 6 weeks ago looked over at him now. Is that accurate? Wade opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I mean, we worked as a team. Answer the question, one of the board members said. Did you develop this strategy? I was involved in the project. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched out. Wade's face had gone red, not from anger, from embarrassment, from being cornered in front of people whose respect he'd been borrowing without earning. No, he finally said. I didn't develop it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, Orson cleared his throat. Wade, I think we need to have a separate conversation about this. I think we all need to have that conversation, the lead investor said. His tone wasn't angry, just matter-minded, like he was recalculating everything he'd thought he knew. We made investment decisions based on our assessment of your leadership team's capabilities. If that assessment was inaccurate, we need to understand why. Wade shifted in his seat. I never said I created it myself. You all just assumed. You accepted praise for it, I interrupted, kept my voice level. When that investor told you it was brilliant work, you thanked him. You didn't correct him. You didn't mention my name. You let everyone in that room believe you'd done something you hadn't done. It was a team effort. Stop saying that. One of the board members cut him off. Older woman, sharp eyes. We've heard enough. Kaya, let's talk about moving forward with implementation. What do you need from us? I spent the next 30 minutes outlining exactly what had to happen. Which markets to exit first. Which teams needed restructuring. How to communicate the changes to local staff without causing panic. What metrics to track weekly versus monthly? Who needed to be making which decisions? They listened, really listened, asked smart questions, took notes. Wade sat there the entire time, not contributing, not speaking unless directly addressed, which he wasn't. When the meeting finally wrapped up, people came up to thank me individually, shook my hand, told me they were relieved to have me involved. asked when I could start the implementation process. Wade left without saying goodbye to anyone. Orson caught up with me as I was packing up my laptop. That was intense, he said. That was honest. I know, and you're right. About all of it. He rubbed his forehead. I should have paid closer attention to who was actually doing the work. I let the optics fool me. Yeah, you did. We're going to make changes. Wade's being moved to a different role. Something where he can't claim ownership of other people's work. That's your decision to make. I'm just here to fix the expansion problem. Still, I want you to know, we're taking this seriously. I zipped up my laptop bag. Good. Send me the implementation timeline, and I'll build out the week-by-week plan. We start in 3 days. Over the next 8 weeks, I worked with them on execution. Not as an employee, as an independent expert they were paying premium rates to access. I came in twice a week, met with the relevant teams, checked progress, adjusted strategies when real-world variables proved different than projected. The turnaround started showing results within a month. Markets they'd exited, stopped draining resources. Markets they'd doubled down on, started generating the returns I'd projected. The investors stopped talking about pulling out and started talking about additional investments. Wade, meanwhile, got transferred to a different division, something to do with internal operations, where he'd have clear deliverables and no ability to take ownership of collaborative work. I heard through people still working there that he'd requested a transfer to a different city within 4 months. Couldn't handle seeing the company recover using a strategy everyone now knew he hadn't created. I didn't feel bad about that. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about moments like this. The satisfaction isn't just in proving you were right. It's in building something that lasts beyond the confrontation. Because while I was implementing the turnaround for my old company, my other consulting work kept growing. The 11 portfolios became 17. Then, 23. Investment groups started reaching out before their companies hit crisis mode, wanting preventive assessments, wanting someone to look at their expansion plans before they committed millions to strategies that wouldn't work. I started turning down projects, not because I couldn't handle them, but because I realized I didn't have to say yes to everything anymore. I could choose work that interested me, work with people who respected expertise, work where my name stayed attached to what I built. 6 months after that presentation where Wade sat in silence, I was working with clients in 9 countries, making more in a month than I'd made in a year at my old job, getting invited to speak at industry events about turnaround strategies and international expansion models. People knew my name now. When I walked into meetings, they knew exactly who I was and why I was there. And Wade, last I heard, he took a position at a much smaller company in a different city, somewhere his reputation hadn't followed him, somewhere he could start over without everyone knowing he'd once accepted applause for work he couldn't reproduce. I didn't keep tabs on him deliberately. Information just filtered back through mutual contacts. The industry's smaller than people think. One afternoon, about 8 months after everything went down, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. Investment manager at a group I'd never worked with. I hope this doesn't come across wrong, the message said, but I wanted you to know that we were about to hire someone for a senior strategy role, and during the reference checks, we heard some concerning things about credit attribution issues. Just wanted to say thank you for being public about what happened. It helped us avoid making a bad hire. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Who were you about to hire?" Someone named Wade. He interviewed really well, but when we dug deeper, the story started falling apart. So that's how it worked. Not just the immediate consequences of being exposed in that boardroom, but the long-term reality that in specialized industries, people talk, they remember, they pass information along when it matters. Wade's ability to coast on other people's work had ended that day in the presentation, not just at one company, but everywhere that reputation mattered. I didn't ruin his career. He'd done that himself by choosing to accept praise he hadn't earned. I just made sure the truth was visible. My consulting work continued growing. By the end of the first year, I'd worked with 38 different portfolios, some short-term assessments, some long-term implementations, all of them paying me rates that reflected actual value, not whatever budget calculation someone in leadership had decided was appropriate. I hired help eventually, not employees, other independent experts who specialized in areas I didn't. We collaborated on larger projects, always with clear attribution for who contributed what. Nobody's name appeared on work they hadn't done. Nobody got praised for someone else's thinking. It sounds simple, but apparently it's revolutionary. The company where everything went down stabilized completely. Their expansion strategy worked. They recovered their losses and started growing sustainably. Orson sent me a message about a year after that confrontation presentation, saying the board had specifically mentioned my work in their annual report. Asked if I wanted to be listed as a strategic advisor. I said yes, with my full name, with accurate descriptions of what I'd actually done. Wade never reached out. Not to apologize, not to explain, not to acknowledge anything. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Some people never develop the self-awareness to understand what they did wrong. They just move on and hope nobody remembers. But people remember. 2 years after I walked out of that investor meeting, I was keynoting at a major industry event, talking about turnaround strategies and sustainable growth models. 700 people in the audience. Questions afterward that showed people had really understood the material. As I was leaving the stage, someone stopped me. Older man, investor type. That presentation you gave 2 years ago, he said. The one where you exposed the credit theft. I was in the room. I remembered him. One of the board members who'd asked Wade directly if he'd developed the strategy. I wanted to tell you something, he continued. After that meeting, our board implemented new policies about attribution and recognition. We require detailed contribution logs on major projects now. We verify claims during presentations. What you did changed how we operate. That's good, I said. That's really good. It wasn't comfortable at the time, but it needed to happen. So thank you. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the empty auditorium, thinking about that moment when I'd placed my visitor badge on the table and walked out, how it had felt like destroying something I'd built, how I hadn't known what would come next. But what came next was better. Not easier, better, more honest, more sustainable, more mine. 3 years in, my consulting practice was established enough that I could afford to be selective. I took on projects that challenged me, turned down work that felt repetitive, started mentoring younger professionals who were dealing with similar credit theft situations, helping them document their work and advocate for themselves. Some of them asked if they should quit like I did. Only if you're ready to build something yourself, I told them. Don't quit to make a point. Quit because you know you can do better somewhere else. Not everyone was ready for that. Some stayed and fought within their companies. Some moved to different organizations. Some started their own practices, like I had. But they all learned the same lesson I'd learned. Your work has to be undeniably yours. Document it. Make sure people know who built what. Don't wait for someone to notice. Make it visible. Wade's name stopped coming up in industry conversations. He'd become one of those people who'd had a moment of visibility and then faded into the background. Working somewhere, doing something, but not making waves, not getting recognition. And me? I built exactly what I'd wanted. A practice where I got paid what I was worth, where my name stayed attached to my thinking, where I could choose who I worked with and what problems I solved. The revenge wasn't destroying Wade's career. That was just a consequence of his own choices catching up with him. The real revenge was building something so successful that it made walking away from that moment look like the best decision I'd ever made. Thank you so much for listening to this whole story. If it resonated with you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories. More people who might need to hear that walking away from people who don't value you isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. All right, thanks again for being here.